For the first time since the conversation Chloe had with her girlfriends had begun, Noah wasn't merely curious. He was concerned. Chloe sniffled again, her gaze dropping back to her hands. Her fingers traced the edge of her wedding ring over and over, as if concentrating on it was easier than meeting anyone's eyes. Serena noticed. With a gentle smile, she tapped Chloe lightly on the shoulder. "Hey." Chloe looked up. "Go on," Serena encouraged, "you're safe here." Chloe drew a shaky breath. "The weirdest part," she began, "it happened on our wedding night." The room became perfectly still. "After he got done interrogating me about things I didn't even know the answers to," Chloe said quietly, "and honestly I don't think the man sitting across from me knew the answers either." She stopped. Her eyes drifted back to her fingers. Brooke groaned playfully. "Chloe." No response. "Come on," Brooke said, "the suspense is killing us." Another long pause. Chloe swallowed. "He said he wanted us to be intimate." She stopped again. Silence. Brooke leaned forward. "And?" Chloe squeezed her eyes shut. "He asked if he could." She couldn't finish. "Chloe," Brooke said softly, "just say it." After several seconds, Chloe finally whispered. "My husband said he wanted to sleep with me." Her voice cracked. "So he could feel connected to Tate." The words landed with a deafening silence. Brooke stared at her. "Excuse me." Mia's mouth slowly fell open. Serena blinked twice, certain she had misheard. "Connected to who?" "Tate," Chloe repeated weakly. "That's exactly what he said." No one laughed. No one even moved. Brooke searched Chloe's face for any sign that this was some elaborate joke. There wasn't one. "Chloe," Brooke said carefully, "your husband is Tate." "I know. So why would he say he wanted to feel connected to Tate?" "I don't know." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "That's why I keep thinking I imagined it." She looked helplessly at her friends. "Because if I didn't imagine it, what does that even mean?" In the kitchen, Noah felt every muscle in his body go rigid. The strawberry he had been holding slipped from his fingers and landed softly on the cutting board. He barely noticed. His breathing slowed. So he could feel connected to Tate. The sentence echoed in his mind again and again. A cold uneasiness settled in his chest. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't simply awkward phrasing. It sounded as though whoever Chloe had been speaking to had referred to Tate as though he were someone else entirely. Noah quietly rested both hands on the countertop. His pulse had begun to race. He didn't know what Chloe's experience meant or whether there was some explanation he hadn't considered. But listening from the kitchen, one thing became clear to him. Chloe wasn't describing an ordinary misunderstanding. She was describing something that had genuinely frightened her. "What else happened?" Brooke asked quietly. Chloe took a shaky breath. "He threatened me." "What?" Mia blurted, setting her glass of lemonade onto the coffee table with a soft clink. Brooke frowned. "He did." Chloe nodded. "Before and after we were sexually intimate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "he said something I can't forget." Brooke leaned forward. "What did he say?" Chloe's eyes drifted back to her fingers. She rubbed her wedding ring with her thumb, delaying the answer. "Chloe," Brooke said gently, "the suspense is killing us." After several long seconds, Chloe finally spoke. "He said," she swallowed, "if you ever try to seduce Tate or ever touch Tate, I'll break your neck and bury you in my family's garden." Silence. Absolute silence. Brooke stared at her. "Excuse me." Mia looked horrified. "Your husband said that to you?" Chloe gave a slow, defeated nod. "I've replayed it in my head over and over. It was the weirdest experience of my life." Serena reached over and took Chloe's hand. "Chloe." "I know how insane it sounds," Chloe whispered. "He kept talking about Tate like Tate was somebody else, then he threatened me if I ever touched my own husband." No one in the room had an explanation. The four women simply sat in stunned silence. In the kitchen, Noah had unconsciously leaned closer to the doorway. His heart skipped a beat. "I'll break your neck and bury you in my family's garden." The words hit him with unsettling familiarity. His expression slowly changed. "I've heard that before." A memory surfaced with startling clarity. The old Rambler house. Andrew had been there. Andrew had even filmed part of the confrontation. Tate, disassociated, looked Noah squarely in the eyes and, in a cold, detached voice, warned him that if he ever tried to seduce or touch Tate, he would break Noah's neck and bury him with a shovel. The wording hadn't been identical, but it had been close enough to send a chill through Noah. He stared silently at the cutting board, no longer seeing the strawberries in front of him. Why would Chloe hear almost the same threat? His mind raced through every possibility he could think of. None of them made sense. For the first time, Noah wondered whether Chloe's account and his own disturbing memory were connected in some way he didn't yet understand. Chloe wiped another tear from her cheek. And the weirdest thing happened the night before I drove to the airport to come back for the funeral preparations. Brooke exchanged a glance with Serena. What happened? Chloe inhaled slowly. I woke up around 2 in the morning. She paused. Tate wasn't in bed. Brooke tilted her head. So where was he? Chloe's eyes dropped to her fingers again. He was standing in the bedroom doorway. The doorway, Mia repeated. Chloe nodded. Just standing there. She wrapped both hands around herself as though the memory still made her cold. He was staring at me. Brooke leaned forward, completely absorbed. How? It was creepy. The room grew silent. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't angry, he just looked at me. She shook her head. It felt like I was the one who had broken into somebody else's house. Serena frowned. What do you mean? He looked at me like I was the intruder, Chloe whispered, like he was trying to decide whether I belonged there. A chill settled over the room. It reminded me of one of those stories about someone waking up and finding a stalker standing in their bedroom. Brooke's expression became serious. That's disturbing. I didn't know what to do, Chloe admitted. He just kept staring. It honestly crossed my mind that he was deciding whether to remove me from the equation. No one interrupted. The strangest part, Chloe continued, was that he was holding a glass. A glass, Mia asked. An alcohol glass. What was he drinking? I don't know. She slowly shook her head. I couldn't tell. Another uneasy silence followed. But he kept sipping it while he stared at me. Brooke frowned. Tate drinks. Rarely. Chloe looked around at her friends. That's why it bothered me so much. She swallowed. Tate doesn't drink alcohol. Her voice became almost a whisper. Unless he's not himself. The sentence lingered in the air. No one knew what to make of it. In the kitchen, Noah had forgotten all about the strawberries. He stood perfectly still, listening despite himself. Tate drinking. That alone caught his attention. In all the years Noah had known him, Tate had almost always avoided alcohol. He had always seemed to prefer staying completely in control of himself. Noah frowned. Unless he's not himself. Chloe's choice of words echoed in his mind. Then he remembered something else. The detached way Tate had sometimes looked at people. The cold, unreadable stare. The strange threat in the Rambler house that Andrew had witnessed and recorded. Now Chloe was describing another unsettling encounter, one where Tate had silently watched her from a doorway in the middle of the night while drinking from a glass he normally would never have touched. Noah rested one hand on the counter. A knot tightened in his stomach. He couldn't tell whether Chloe was connecting unrelated events or whether there really was a pattern. Either way, she didn't sound like someone inventing a dramatic story. She sounded frightened. And as Noah listened to the silence that followed, he found himself wondering what, if anything, had happened after Chloe woke to find Tate standing in that doorway. Noah had once assumed Tate only drank on rare ceremonial occasions, a toast at an important gala or a single glass of wine during a celebration. But over the past 2 years, Noah had begun to notice a pattern. Whenever Tate was under extraordinary stress, a family crisis, a funeral, or intense emotional conflict, a drink would suddenly appear in his hand. It was so unlike him that Noah had begun to wonder if those moments coincided with Tate behaving as though he were someone else entirely. And it gets even weirder, Chloe said, dabbing at her eyes. Brooke exchanged a nervous glance with Serena. What happened? After we got the call that Uncle Tim had died, I went looking for Tate. I found him alone in the bathroom. Chloe hesitated, clearly embarrassed by the memory. There was a photograph taped to the bathroom mirror. Noah's knife stopped halfway through another strawberry. Brooke frowned. A photograph of who? Chloe looked up, her expression bewildered. Of Tate as a small child. What? Serena said. A much younger Tate, Chloe replied. He looked about 12. He was standing there, completely absorbed in that photograph, almost like nothing else in the world existed. The living room fell silent. I honestly thought I was hallucinating, Chloe whispered. It didn't make any sense. In the kitchen, Noah stared at the cutting board. A 12-year-old Tate in a photograph, combined with everything Chloe had already described, the third-person questions, the threats, the drinking, the unsettling stare in the doorway. The image lodged itself in his mind. None of it fit together, yet all of it seemed connected. He slowly set the knife down, no longer interested in the strawberries, wondering what had happened to Tate that made memories of his younger self seem to consume him. Brooke was the first to break the silence. So let me ask you something. Chloe looked up. Did the real Tate ever actually go on the honeymoon, Brooke asked carefully, or even show up for the wedding? Chloe's expression fell. She slowly shook her head. No. The answer stunned the room. No, Serena repeated. Chloe folded her hands together. When he showed up for the wedding, she began, he was already standing at the altar. She frowned, searching for the right words. It looked like Tate. But Mia prompted. But something was wrong. Brooke leaned forward. Wrong how? His posture. Chloe's voice was quiet but certain. The way he stood wasn't like Tate. She paused. The suit was wrong too. What do you mean? Serena asked. Tate is incredibly particular about his clothes. The style wasn't one he normally would have chosen. Everything fit, but it didn't feel like him. The women exchanged uneasy glances. It was like, Chloe whispered, someone else was inside Tate's body. No one interrupted. And it never really went away. What do you mean? Brooke asked. Unless he was asleep, he always felt different. Chloe rubbed her temples. He'd talk about Tate in the third person, like Tate was someone else entirely. She looked at Brooke. He'd ask these incredibly invasive questions about Tate and Noah like he was obsessed and jealous of their proximity to one another. She hesitated. He brought up Noah like the blonde was in his way. The room grew quiet again. He kept asking questions about Noah that made me uncomfortable. What kind of questions? Mia asked. The kind that didn't make sense unless he thought Noah knew something he didn't. Brooke frowned. That's strange. And one night, Chloe continued, he asked if I'd go with him to a remote location to have sex. Did he say why? Serena asked. No. What did you do? I told him absolutely not. Chloe let out a slow breath. And he was drinking. Tate? Brooke asked. Chloe nodded. Vodka. She counted on her fingers. Whiskey. Another finger. And a Manhattan. Brooke's eyebrows shot up. A Manhattan. I've never seen Tate drink Manhattans. In the kitchen, Noah's hands froze on the cutting board. A Manhattan. The word struck him like a spark. His mind rushed back to the morning of the wedding. He had awakened with an odd taste lingering in his mouth. At the time, he hadn't understood it. Later, after thinking about it over and over, he finally recognized the flavor. A Manhattan. Not whiskey alone. Not wine. A Manhattan. His heartbeat quickened. Whoever had been close enough to leave that unmistakable taste had been drinking the very cocktail Chloe was now describing. Noah slowly leaned against the counter. One coincidence could be dismissed. Two might be a chance. But as Chloe continued speaking, he found himself mentally placing each unsettling detail beside the others. The unfamiliar posture. The third-person references to Tate. The unusual drinking. The probing questions. Now the Manhattan. He still couldn't explain any of it. But for the first time, he couldn't convince himself they were all unrelated. The creepiest part, Chloe said quietly, was what he said when he asked me to go to that remote location. Brooke, Serena, and Mia waited without interrupting. He acted like I was Tate, and it was Tate's 13th birthday. Brooke frowned. What do you mean? He looked at me and asked, "What's it like to be a teenager now?" The room fell silent. Chloe shook her head. It didn't make any sense. I wasn't 13, I wasn't even close. She swallowed. Sometimes he'd put his arm around my shoulders and gently stroke my hair. He'd run his fingers through my locks and tell me how lucky I was that he was in my life. A shiver ran through her. Then he'd call me by the wrong pronoun, correct himself, and keep talking as though nothing had happened. Mia looked thoroughly unsettled. That is really strange. Chloe nodded. And then he'd say things like, "I want to be alone with the birthday boy." "The birthday boy," Serena repeated. I never knew who he meant. Brooke's expression hardened. "Chloe, that doesn't sound like normal behavior." It wasn't. Chloe looked down at her hands again. "I honestly think there's something seriously wrong with Tate psychologically." She took a slow breath. Almost every conversation somehow turned back to Tate. "But he is Tate," Mia said carefully. "I know," Chloe replied. "That's exactly why it was so unsettling." She continued, "He'd ask me incredibly personal questions." Like what? Brooke asked. How often Tate had been intimate with people, how many past relationships had he had, whether Tate had ever become intimate with Noah. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I kept telling him I didn't know. Chloe's voice trembled. But every time I couldn't answer, he'd accuse me of lying. Serena reached for Chloe's hand. "You weren't lying." "I know that." Chloe stared at the floor. But he seemed absolutely convinced I was hiding something. She closed her eyes for a moment. Looking back, her voice became almost a whisper. I don't think he believed he was asking questions about himself. Brooke looked at her intently. "What do you mean?" Chloe shook her head slowly. "I think whoever I was talking to believed they were talking about Tate." No one spoke. I think that's how he experienced the entire honeymoon. In the kitchen, Noah stood motionless beside the counter. The strawberries had long since been forgotten. Each new detail Chloe shared made the knot in his stomach tighten. Questions about Tate, as if Tate were someone else. He remembered hearing similar detached comments before, moments he'd dismissed because they had seemed too bizarre to dwell on. Now, hearing Chloe describe them one after another, he found himself replaying old conversations in his mind. Then she mentioned Noah by name. His chest tightened. Was he asking about me? Noah couldn't understand why someone speaking as though Tate were a different person would be so interested in whether Tate and Noah had ever been close. He rested both hands on the countertop, trying to organize the pieces in his mind. None of them fit neatly. Yet they all pointed in the same direction. Chloe wasn't describing isolated odd moments. She was describing a consistent pattern of behavior that had left her frightened and deeply confused. Noah quietly exhaled. He still didn't know what the explanation was. But he was no longer surprised that Chloe had spent the honeymoon wondering whether she was imagining it all. From everything he'd overheard, she sounded like someone struggling to make sense of experiences that, to her, didn't add up. Chloe's voice grew quieter. "There was one moment on the honeymoon that I can't stop thinking about." Brooke leaned in. "What happened?" Chloe took a slow, shaky breath. "I was taking a shower." She looked down at her hands again. "I was washing my hair when the shower door suddenly opened and Tate was there." Serena frowned. "You didn't expect him?" Chloe slowly shook her head. "No." She swallowed. "When I looked over." Her voice caught. The expression on his face was the most heartbreaking, pathetic look I've ever seen on another human being. The three women exchanged confused glances. "He looked terrified," Chloe whispered, "like someone who thought the most important person in his life was about to disappear forever." Brooke's expression softened. "What did he say?" Chloe hesitated before answering. "He looked right at me." Another sniffle. "And asked if I was leaving him." Silence settled over the room. I remember staring at him because the question made no sense. She shook her head. "I even asked him to shut the shower door because the room was getting cold." Instead, she said, he stepped into the shower with her, still looking utterly devastated. "He just kept looking at me like." She stopped. "Like what?" Mia asked gently. "Like I wasn't Chloe." The room became perfectly still. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. I honestly think. She paused. I think he believed I was Tate. No one spoke. It was so surreal, Chloe whispered. For a second I actually questioned whether I was losing my mind. Brooke reached over and squeezed her hand. You weren't imagining how frightened that made you. Chloe nodded. I even stopped drinking for the rest of the honeymoon because I started wondering if maybe I'd had too much to drink earlier in the trip and was somehow remembering everything wrong. She laughed weakly through her tears. I wanted to make sure I wasn't on some kind of bender. But nothing changed. She looked at each of her friends. He still looked at me like he was talking to someone else. In the kitchen, Noah had completely stopped preparing the strawberries. He stood frozen beside the counter, his attention fixed on every word drifting in from the living room. He thought she was Tate. That possibility hadn't even crossed his mind until Chloe said it aloud. Now, as he replayed everything she had described, the third-person conversations, the strange questions, the threats, the drinking, and the confused behavior, it painted a picture Noah couldn't easily dismiss. He rested one hand on the countertop. If Chloe's interpretation was correct, then she hadn't simply experienced a difficult honeymoon. She had spent days feeling as though the man in front of her was responding to a reality she couldn't see. Noah exhaled slowly. He still didn't know what explained any of it. But hearing Chloe describe the fear and confusion in her own voice, he understood why she had questioned her own memories before daring to share them with anyone else. Chloe's composure finally cracked. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, trying to steady her breathing before she forced herself to continue. I asked him, she whispered. I asked him what was wrong with him. No one in the room moved. The only sound was the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Chloe wiped another tear from her cheek. He looked straight at me, her voice shook. His whole expression changed. It wasn't angry exactly, it was desperate. She closed her eyes, remembering. He said I'd kept him waiting for 2 years. The room fell silent. Brooke frowned. 2 years. Chloe nodded. He said he wasn't going to accept any more games. In the kitchen, Noah's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. 2 years. Something about that phrase struck him. Not because he understood it. Because it sounded as though Tate, or whoever Chloe believed she had been speaking to, was referring to a completely different history than the one Chloe had lived. Noah slowly lowered the knife onto the cutting board. His appetite had vanished. I didn't understand him, Chloe continued. I thought maybe he'd mixed up a conversation we'd had earlier. She shook her head. But then he told me. Her voice became barely audible. That I had to make a choice. A choice between what? Serena asked quietly. I asked him that. Chloe let out a shaky breath. I told him, she hesitated. I told the person standing in front of me. She looked helplessly at her friends. I know this sounds freaky. No one's laughing, Brooke said softly. Just tell us. Chloe nodded. I said. Another pause. I choose Tate. Brooke looked confused. That seems like a reasonable answer. That's what I thought. Chloe swallowed hard. But he looked at me and said. Her voice cracked. Tate isn't one of the options, the voice had said. It's either him or the cunt. Silence. No one knew what to say. I kept telling him I didn't know what he was talking about. She shook her head over and over. I said it again. I don't understand. And he just. She stopped. Her breathing became uneven. Serena reached over and took both of Chloe's hands. You don't have to rush. Chloe nodded gratefully before continuing. He became more forceful. Her eyes filled with tears again. He lifted my body off the floor, then pinned me against the shower wall. The room instantly went rigid. Brooke's face lost all color. Mia stared at Chloe in horror. I panicked. Chloe's voice trembled uncontrollably now. I realized he wasn't listening to anything I was saying. She drew in a ragged breath. He kept insisting I was going to choose, and he would convince me to choose him instead. I told him over and over that I didn't know what he meant. She shook her head. I couldn't make sense of anything he was saying. Another tear rolled down her cheek. The only thing I could think to do. She swallowed. Was getting away. I managed to knee him hard enough in the crotch to break free. Her shoulders began shaking. I ran. The word came out as little more than a whisper. I just ran. Brooke moved from her chair and sat beside Chloe, wrapping both arms around her. Serena rested a comforting hand on Chloe's back. Mia quietly handed her another tissue. Chloe buried her face in her hands. If I hadn't gotten away. She couldn't finish the sentence. No one asked her to. I have a pretty good idea where that confrontation was heading. Her voice broke completely. He terrified me. The room remained silent except for Chloe's quiet sobbing. In the kitchen, Noah hadn't realized he'd stopped breathing. He slowly exhaled. His thoughts were racing so fast he could barely separate one from another. Tate isn't one of the options. The sentence echoed through his mind. It wasn't just disturbing. It sounded completely disconnected from reality. Noah replayed everything Chloe had described over the last hour. The third-person references. The questions about Tate. The drinking. The strange posture. The threats. The confusion over identities. Now this. He rested both palms against the countertop, trying to steady himself. Part of him wanted to dismiss it all as grief, exhaustion, or misunderstanding. Another part couldn't ignore how consistent Chloe's account had been. She hadn't told the story dramatically. She had told it like someone trying desperately to understand an experience that still frightened her. Noah glanced toward the living room. He could hear Chloe crying softly as her friends comforted her. His chest tightened. Whatever had happened on that honeymoon, it had left Chloe genuinely afraid. And for the first time, Noah found himself wondering whether there were pieces of Tate's behavior that he'd ignored for years simply because he had never known how to explain them himself. Chloe wiped at her eyes with another tissue. He kept pestering me to go with him to a remote location, she whispered. He asked over and over until I finally agreed because I just wanted him to stop asking. Brooke's expression hardened. Where did he take you? He drove behind an abandoned meat-packing facility. The room fell silent. Why there? Serena asked. Chloe slowly shook her head. I never knew. She looked down at her hands. When we got there, he offered me a children's energy drink. He said he'd already asked Talia if he could give me one. Brooke frowned. Why would he need permission from Tate's mother? Exactly, Chloe said quietly. Nothing he said made sense. She rubbed her temples. He spoke to me like I was someone else. Every conversation felt like I had walked into the middle of a story that had started years before I arrived. Chloe's eyes filled with tears again. Afterward, he dragged me over the center console and started saying things I couldn't understand. He talked as though I already knew people and events I'd never heard of. He kept mentioning Tate as though Tate were another person entirely. Serena reached over and squeezed Chloe's hand. You were trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Chloe nodded. That's exactly how it felt. In the kitchen, Noah had completely forgotten about the strawberries. The mention of the abandoned meat-packing building caught his attention immediately. Why there? Of all the places Tate could have driven, why choose somewhere isolated and abandoned? Noah's thoughts circled around the same pattern Chloe had described all afternoon. The strange questions, the third-person references to Tate, the unfamiliar behavior, and now another conversation that sounded disconnected from reality. He didn't know what conclusion to draw. But he could tell from Chloe's trembling voice that she wasn't recounting the honeymoon as a romantic memory. She was describing it as a series of bewildering experiences that had left her questioning what she had witnessed. Chloe drew in a long, shaky breath. I finally worked up the courage to ask him who he was. The room went quiet. Brooke looked puzzled. You asked your husband who he was. Chloe gave a helpless nod. I know how ridiculous that sounds. She let out a humorless laugh. Why would I ever need to ask my own husband that? She looked down at her hands. But honestly, her voice became almost a whisper. I felt like I was losing my mind. Serena gently squeezed her shoulder. So what happened? I just looked at him and asked, who are you? Mia leaned forward. And what did he say? Chloe stared at the floor for a moment before answering. That's the strangest part. She slowly looked back at her friends. When he answered, she paused. It wasn't a name I'd ever heard before. In the kitchen, Noah instinctively took a small step closer to the doorway. His heart had begun beating faster. He didn't even realize he was holding his breath. Well, Brooke said, unable to hide her curiosity, the suspense is killing us. Chloe swallowed. He said. Another pause. His name was Jay. Silence. Complete silence. Brooke blinked. Jay. Chloe nodded. I'd never heard that name before. She looked from one friend to another. I've never met a friend named Jay. I've never heard Talia mention a Jay. I don't know a family friend named Jay. Serena frowned thoughtfully. So what did you do? When we got back for Uncle Tim's funeral, I started asking people. You actually asked, Mia said. I had to. Chloe shrugged. I asked Talia if she knew anyone named Jay. What did she say? She said she didn't know anyone by that name. Brooke frowned. And then, I asked Linus. Chloe hesitated. He looked at me. She searched for the right description. I don't even know how to explain the look. Confused, Serena suggested. Maybe. Surprised. I don't know. Chloe shook her head. It was almost like. She stopped. Like what? Brooke asked. Like he didn't know whether to take me seriously. She sighed. I honestly couldn't tell if he recognized the name or if he thought I'd completely lost my mind. And Terrence. He didn't know either. Another silence settled over the room. Brooke finally spoke. So did you ever ask Tate about it? Chloe looked down at her wedding ring. I told myself I wasn't going to. She slowly nodded. But eventually. Her expression tightened. I did. In the kitchen, Noah remained perfectly still. Jay. The name meant nothing to him. He quietly searched his memory. Family gatherings. School events. Business dinners. Vacations. He couldn't recall a single person connected to Tate or his family by that name. Noah frowned. That more than anything unsettled him. If the name had belonged to an old friend or distant relative, someone would have recognized it immediately. Instead, according to Chloe, every person she'd asked had either denied knowing the name or reacted with uncertainty. Noah rested one hand against the kitchen doorway. He didn't know whether Jay was real, imagined, or something else entirely. But he knew one thing. Chloe hadn't stopped with a single strange encounter. She had tried to verify what she'd experienced. And every answer she received had only left her with more questions than before. Chloe sat quietly for several moments before speaking again. There was one time. Her friends looked at her. One time he actually seemed like himself. Brooke leaned forward. What happened? We were in the hotel room. Chloe's expression softened with confusion rather than fear. He happened to look into the bathroom mirror. She paused. And when he saw his own reflection, she shook her head slowly. It scared him. Mia frowned. Scared him. Chloe nodded. It wasn't like someone checking their appearance, it was like he'd seen something completely unexpected. She took a slow breath. He looked over at me, completely bewildered. What did he say? Serena asked. He asked, Chloe swallowed, are we already on our honeymoon? The room became silent. Brooke blinked. What? I thought he was joking. But he wasn't. Chloe shook her head. He genuinely looked confused. She stared at the floor. It was almost like he didn't remember the wedding. No one spoke. I asked him, Chloe continued, who is Jay? The color drained from her face just remembering it. I have never seen someone become so terrified so quickly. He was frightened, Mia asked. Chloe nodded. It was like I'd said the one name in the world he never wanted to hear. Brooke frowned. What did he do? He immediately shut down. She wrapped her arms around herself. He looked at me and said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You're my wife, you shouldn't ask questions about ex-lovers. Silence settled over the room once again. Ex-lovers, Serena repeated. That's exactly what he said. Brooke looked completely baffled. That doesn't explain who Jay is. I know. It just gave me another question instead of an answer. Chloe let out a tired sigh. The whole honeymoon felt like that. In the kitchen, Noah stood motionless. His own reflection frightened him. That detail lingered in Noah's mind. If Chloe's memory was accurate, then for at least one brief moment, Tate had appeared disoriented enough to ask whether they were already on their honeymoon. Noah frowned. Did he really not remember the wedding, or was something else going on? Then another sentence echoed in his thoughts. You shouldn't ask questions about ex-lovers. Noah couldn't make sense of it. Who was Jay? Why would hearing that name provoke fear? And why answer with a warning instead of an explanation? The questions accumulated faster than Noah could sort through them. He quietly leaned against the kitchen counter, no longer pretending to be interested in the strawberries. Chloe gave a weary, almost embarrassed laugh. You know what's really weird? What? Brooke asked. I must be the only person alive whose husband proposed to her during their own honeymoon. The three women looked at her in confusion. He proposed. Chloe nodded. 3 times. 3, Mia exclaimed. 3 separate times. Brooke frowned. Didn't he remember you were already married? That's what made it so strange. Chloe shook her head. Each proposal sounded sincere, like he genuinely believed he was asking me for the first time. Then he called me Tate and it felt weird. She managed a sad smile. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Noah closed his eyes for a moment. Another piece of the honeymoon had fallen into place, or perhaps further out of place. Repeated proposals after the wedding. Questions that suggested forgotten events. Fear of seeing a reflection. A mysterious name. To Noah, none of it formed a clear picture. It only deepened the mystery that Chloe had been carrying alone ever since she returned. Brooke suddenly doubled over laughing. She tried to stop, but every time she looked at Chloe's completely serious expression, another burst of laughter escaped. I'm sorry, Brooke gasped between laughs. I'm really sorry, but listen to what you just said. Serena pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. Mia covered her mouth, already losing the battle. Brooke wiped a tear from her eye. So, you're telling me your husband Tate proposed to you during your honeymoon? She had to stop again as another laugh interrupted her. While thinking you were Tate. Serena let out an involuntary snort. Brooke pointed helplessly into the air. So, from his perspective, he was proposing to himself. She shook her head. As somebody else. Mia finally laughed. What is this? Brooke continued. Are we living in a loony bin? Serena and Mia tried to compose themselves, but the sheer absurdity of the situation made it difficult. Chloe, however, didn't laugh. She simply looked down at her hands. I know how it sounds. Her voice was tired. It sounds like something that belongs in a psychiatric hospital. The laughter gradually faded as her friends noticed how genuinely distressed she was. Brooke's smile softened. I know you aren't making this up. She sighed. But I have to admit. She shook her head in disbelief. That's the first time I've ever heard of a groom proposing to his own bride during their honeymoon because he apparently thought he was talking to someone else. She gave an incredulous laugh. I don't think there's a record book for that. Mia smiled faintly. If there were. Brooke pointed toward Chloe. You'd probably be holding the record. Even Chloe managed the smallest smile. Brooke leaned back into the couch. Welcome to the Blue family, she joked lightly. Apparently nothing around here is ever simple. Once you join the family, don't be surprised if your spouse has no clue who he is and who he's sitting next to. The joke drew a reluctant chuckle from Serena and Mia. In the kitchen, Noah let out a slow breath. For a brief moment, hearing the women laugh broke some of the oppressive tension that had filled the house. Yet he couldn't bring himself to laugh. Everything Chloe had described still sounded bewildering to him, but beneath the absurdity he heard something else. Fear, confusion, and a desperate attempt to understand experiences she couldn't explain. He looked down at the untouched strawberries. The story sounded unbelievable. What unsettled Noah most was that Chloe didn't sound like someone inventing it. She sounded like someone still trying to make sense of it herself. Chloe shifted uneasily in her seat. There was something else that really unsettled me. Brooke looked at her with concern. What? Chloe sighed. When he was whoever he thought he was. She struggled to find the words. He became incredibly clingy. Clingy? Serena asked. Chloe nodded. It felt less like being with my husband and more like being with someone who was emotionally desperate for reassurance. She wrapped her own arms around herself, demonstrating. He'd constantly want to hug me, he never wanted me out of his sight. If I stood up to get something, he'd ask where I was going. Mia frowned. That doesn't sound like the Tate we know. It wasn't. Chloe gave a nervous laugh. It honestly reminded me of those old cartoons. Brooke smiled faintly. Which ones? You know, Chloe said, like Penelope Pussycat and Pepe Le Pew. The others nodded. He'd just follow me around everywhere, acting like he couldn't bear for me to leave the room. It became overwhelming. She looked embarrassed. I started feeling trapped. The room fell quiet. Brooke's expression softened. That sounds emotionally exhausting. It was, Chloe admitted. Every time I thought I had a moment to myself, he'd appear again. It felt like he was terrified I'd disappear if he let me out of his sight. In the kitchen, Noah stood silently with his hands resting on the countertop. That comparison stirred an old memory. He remembered being much younger, standing near the front door with his backpack over one shoulder, ready to leave the house. According to Talia, whenever Noah announced he was going somewhere, Tate would immediately trail after him, refusing to let him out of his sight. Talia had laughed about it back then. There's Pepe Le Pew, she'd tease, pointing at Tate, and Noah's poor Penelope Pussycat. At the time, everyone had treated it as a harmless childhood attachment. Remembering it now, after everything Chloe had described, Noah wasn't sure what to think. He quietly looked toward the living room. Chloe wasn't laughing as she told the story. She looked drained. To her, the behavior hadn't felt affectionate. It had felt desperate, constant, and confusing, leaving her with the impression that whoever she had been speaking to was afraid of being abandoned. Chloe let out a long, exhausted sigh. There was something else that made the whole trip feel wrong. Brooke looked at her sympathetically. What was it? Chloe hesitated. When he was acting like that, he became incredibly physically affectionate. It wasn't how Tate normally behaved. Serena tilted her head. In what way? It almost felt like I was a favorite stuffed animal or a puppy, and he was a little boy who never wanted to let go. Chloe rubbed her forehead. He was always trying to hold my hand, hug me, put his cheek next to mine, play footsie under the table, or pull me close. Sometimes I'd have to gently push him away because he kept trying to pull me onto his lap. After a while, it became overwhelming. Brooke frowned. That doesn't sound like the Tate we've always known. Exactly, Chloe replied. It wasn't just that he was affectionate, it was that it didn't feel like him. Everything about it felt off. She looked down at her hands. One afternoon, he insisted on driving me out to get dessert. During the drive, he kept reaching over, trying to keep physical contact with me while we talked. It was constant, like he couldn't tolerate even a few moments of distance. And then, Chloe said, Tate put his hand on my clothed privates during the drive and started stroking me while he was driving. It became quite frenzied. I came, but I've never had a guy give me a hand job before. Silence. Chloe shook her head. I remember thinking that if anyone had watched us, they'd probably assume everything was perfectly romantic. She gave a weary laugh. But it didn't feel romantic to me. Her smile faded. It just felt strange. Brooke reached over and squeezed her hand. You spent the entire honeymoon trying to figure out who you were talking to. Chloe nodded. By the end of it, I was mentally exhausted. I was honestly relieved when we came home early for the funeral. As awful as that sounds, another 2 weeks of feeling confused and second-guessing myself. She shook her head. I don't know how much more of it I could have handled. In the kitchen, Noah quietly stared at the untouched platter of strawberries. He could hear the exhaustion in Chloe's voice. She no longer sounded frightened so much as worn down by constantly questioning her own perceptions. Noah realized that every story she'd told shared the same theme. She had spent the honeymoon feeling as though the man beside her was behaving in ways she couldn't reconcile with the Tate she thought she knew. Whether there was an explanation or not, Noah understood one thing clearly. Chloe sounded genuinely relieved to be home. Chloe wiped her eyes, but this time there was something different in her expression. Not just fear. Recognition. "I think I figured out what's wrong with Tate," she said quietly. Brooke, Serena, and Mia all looked at her. "What do you mean?" Serena asked. Chloe took a breath. "Whoever that was or whatever was happening, I think there has to be some kind of explanation." She hesitated. "I started thinking about my grandmother." The women listened. She had borderline personality disorder. Chloe looked down. "My family never really talked about it because it was painful. She struggled a lot. She would become intensely attached to people, especially romantic partners. It wasn't just that she liked them, she would become completely consumed by them." Brooke's expression softened. "That must have been difficult." "It was terrifying sometimes," Chloe admitted. "She would obsess over relationships and couldn't handle the idea of someone leaving. Doctors told us she was more of a danger to herself than anyone else." She shook her head. "But I want to be clear, most people with borderline personality disorder aren't dangerous. Most are compassionate, loving people who struggle with overwhelming emotions. My grandmother's case was just extreme." Serena nodded. "So what made you think of her?" Chloe looked toward the floor. "Tate's behavior." She swallowed. "The neediness, the fear of being abandoned, the way he acted like he couldn't survive if someone walked away." She paused. "It reminded me of that desperation." Brooke frowned. "So you think Tate has borderline personality disorder?" Chloe hesitated. "I don't know." Her voice became quieter. "I'm not a doctor, I can't diagnose him." She looked at her friends. "But something is happening, something psychological." She shook her head. "Maybe it's an alternate personality, maybe it's something else, but the person I saw on that honeymoon, the person who was so desperate to hold on to me." She shivered. "That wasn't the Tate I knew." In the kitchen, Noah stood completely still. The words borderline personality disorder echoed in his mind. He didn't know enough to make any conclusions. But Chloe's description of the behavior caught his attention. The fear of abandonment. The emotional intensity. The sudden shifts. The feeling that Tate was becoming someone else entirely. Noah thought back over the years. There had always been moments when Tate seemed terrified of losing him. Moments when Tate would cling too tightly, demand too much reassurance, or react with an intensity that didn't match what was happening. When Noah was younger, everyone had called it attachment. A childhood phase. A sign that Tate cared. But standing in the kitchen now, listening to Chloe describe the same kind of desperation from an entirely different relationship, Noah wondered if he had misunderstood what he had been seeing all along. Still, one thing bothered him. Chloe wasn't only describing someone who was afraid of being abandoned. She was describing someone who seemed confused about who he was. And that was the part Noah couldn't explain. He looked toward the living room. Chloe wasn't trying to insult Tate. She was trying to understand him. And somehow that made the whole thing even more unsettling. Chloe wiped her face, but her voice became steadier. "He needs treatment." The words were not angry. They were almost sad. "I still would have married him," Chloe said. "That's what people don't understand." Brooke, Serena, and Mia listened carefully. "If I had known before we got married, I would have required him to get help first. I would have wanted him to see someone, to understand what was happening, to have support." She shook her head. "I wouldn't have abandoned him." Chloe looked down at her wedding ring. "If something is wrong psychologically, that doesn't mean someone is a bad person. It doesn't mean you throw them away." Serena nodded slowly. "But you feel like you weren't given the choice." "Exactly." Chloe's eyes filled again. "I feel tricked." She quickly added, "And I don't even know if that's fair." Brooke looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I don't think Tate intentionally hid something from me." Chloe sighed. "When I asked him about it, the time he was looking in the mirror and seemed confused, he acted like I was completely insane, like I had invented the whole thing." She shook her head. "I don't think he knows what he does." The room became quiet. "So it's not like he sat down and decided to deceive me," Chloe continued. "I don't think he even understands what's happening to him." She looked exhausted. But living with someone who is experiencing something this extreme is exhausting. Her voice cracked. I love him, I care about him, but it is terrifying to feel like you're sharing a life with someone who can suddenly become a completely different version of himself. Brooke reached for her hand. You've been carrying this alone. Chloe nodded. I have. She took a deep breath. Thankfully, I know enough about mental health to recognize that something is wrong. I'm not walking into this completely blind. She gave a small sad laugh. But I've never experienced anything like this. She looked at her friends. I've never had someone wrap their arms around me or hold onto me because they're convinced that if I leave the room, I'm leaving them forever. In the kitchen, Noah felt his chest tighten. He had expected anger from Chloe. Resentment. A desire to walk away. Instead, she was talking about helping Tate. That surprised him. She wasn't excusing the frightening moments, she wasn't pretending they hadn't happened. But she was also refusing to reduce Tate to his worst behavior. Noah stared at the counter, thinking about all the times Tate had reacted as though losing someone was the end of the world. The times when Tate's fear had appeared bigger than the situation itself. The times when affection had turned into desperation. For years, Noah had struggled to understand whether Tate's behavior came from control, manipulation, fear, or something else entirely. Now he wondered if the answer was more complicated than he had wanted to admit. But another thought troubled him. Whatever was happening, Tate needed help. Not just because of how it affected the people around him. Because somewhere underneath all of it was a person who seemed lost inside his own mind. Noah quietly looked toward the living room. Chloe wasn't describing a monster. She was describing someone she believed was suffering. And somehow, that made the situation feel even heavier. Chloe's friends stayed with her for a long time after she finished talking. Serena hugged her tightly before leaving. You call us if you need anything, she said, anything. Mia nodded. You're not alone in this. Brooke gave Chloe one last look before stepping toward the door. And Chloe. Chloe looked up. Don't convince yourself you're crazy just because something doesn't make sense. Those words stayed with her. After the three women left, the house became quiet again. Too quiet. Chloe remained sitting on the couch, staring at her hands. The conversation replayed over and over in her mind. Every strange moment. Every confusing conversation. Every time Tate had looked at her, she had looked like someone else. She wondered if she was missing something obvious. If there was a simple explanation. If somehow her own mind had twisted everything into something it wasn't. Am I losing my mind? The question frightened her more than she wanted to admit. A few minutes later, Noah walked into the room carrying a bowl of freshly cut fruit. His expression was calm and casual. He acted as though he hadn't heard a single word. Would you like something to eat? He asked. Chloe looked up. For a moment she studied his face, wondering if he knew. You seem a bit sad. The kindness in his voice caught her off guard. No thank you, she said quietly. Noah gave a small nod. Okay. He set the bowl down on the coffee table. The room fell silent again. Chloe watched him carefully, trying to read his expression. But Noah gave nothing away. He simply turned toward the hallway. As he started to leave, Chloe looked down at the fruit bowl. For some reason, the simple gesture almost made her want to cry. Because after everything she had said, after admitting things she barely understood herself, Noah had not looked at her like she was strange. He had not questioned her. He had not laughed. He had simply offered her something to eat. And somehow that small act of normal kindness felt overwhelming. Chloe sniffled, wiping quickly at the corner of her eye before looking back at Noah. Hey Noah, sit down, I want to talk. Noah froze for a moment. The tone of her voice told him everything before she even said another word. He slowly lowered himself into the chair across from her, his shoulders tense. He already knew where this was going. There was a heaviness in the room, the kind that came before a conversation neither person wanted to have. Chloe looked like she had been holding everything in for a long time, and Noah could feel the weight of whatever she was about to say pressing down on him. He glanced away, taking a quiet breath. Chloe, he started, but she shook her head gently. Just let me say this, she whispered. Noah stayed silent. He knew that whatever came next was going to change something. Chloe stared at Noah for a moment, her expression uncertain. "Did Tate ever act like someone else?" she asked quietly. Noah blinked. The question caught him off guard. For a second he didn't know what she meant, then his mind immediately went back to that night at the Rambler. Andrew's recording. He remembered sitting there, watching Tate in the living room, hearing the way his voice changed when he thought nobody important was listening. It was like he had stepped into another version of himself, someone colder, more controlled, almost like he was performing a role. But Noah swallowed. He couldn't tell Chloe that he had only seen it once and still didn't fully understand what he had witnessed. "I remember a time," Noah admitted slowly, "but I don't know if I'd say he was acting like someone else." Chloe's eyebrows pulled together. "What do you mean?" Noah looked down at his hands. "Andrew recorded him talking to someone in the living room at the Rambler," he said. "Tate sounded different, not completely different, but it wasn't the Tate I usually knew." Chloe stayed quiet. Noah continued, choosing his words carefully. "He was calmer, more confident, like he wasn't worried about anyone's feelings or what people thought of him. It was like he knew exactly what he was doing." Chloe's face tightened slightly. "But you never saw that side of him before?" Noah shook his head. "Not really, not before that, not after that." The room went silent. Noah looked at Chloe and realized the question wasn't just curiosity. She was trying to understand something about her husband that she had probably been feeling for a long time. And maybe, deep down, she was wondering if she was the only one who had ever noticed. Chloe sniffled, her fingers tightening around the tissue in her hand. "Did Tate ever threaten you?" Noah went still. For a moment, he didn't answer. The question carried more weight than Chloe probably realized. He looked away, remembering the moments he had tried to convince himself weren't as bad as they felt. Then he nodded once. "Yes." Chloe's eyes widened slightly. "When?" Noah swallowed. "It happened with Andrew there." The memory came back sharply, the tension in the room, the way Tate's expression had changed, the way his words had sounded less like a warning and more like a promise. "Andrew saw it," Noah said quietly. "He heard everything." Chloe stared at him, her sadness shifting into something else. Concern, anger, maybe even disbelief. "Tate threatened you in front of Andrew." Noah nodded again. "He didn't always do it in a way that other people would notice," Noah explained. "That was the thing, he knew how to make it sound like he was just talking, like he was upset or frustrated, but I knew what he meant." Chloe looked down. For the first time, she wasn't just hearing about Tate's mistakes. She was beginning to understand the fear Noah had carried around him for years. "What did he say?" she whispered. Noah hesitated, because repeating the words made them real again. Noah swallowed hard. "He said he would hurt me if I ever tried to get too close to Tate." Chloe's expression changed instantly. The sadness in her eyes disappeared, replaced by alarm. She stared at Noah as if she was trying to understand the words but couldn't make them fit with the person she thought she knew. "He said that," she whispered. Noah nodded slowly. "Andrew was there, he heard him." Chloe's face tightened. "Noah, that's not just being angry, that's a threat." "I know," Noah said quietly. He looked down, his fingers twisting together. The worst part was how calm he was. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't losing control. He said it like he was making sure I understood. Chloe felt a chill run through her. All the excuses she had made for Tate, the stress, the jealousy, the fear of losing people, suddenly felt much smaller compared to what Noah was describing. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked softly. Noah gave a tired, almost painful smile. "Because who was going to believe me?" Chloe flinched. Noah looked back at her. This stranger in Tate's body was good at making himself look like the reasonable one. He could make people think I was the problem. Chloe sat there silently, realizing that Noah wasn't just talking about a bad argument. He was talking about being afraid. Chloe shifted in her seat, clearly trying to move the conversation away from the painful memories. After a moment of silence, she looked at Noah. "How did you get Tate to heal and be devoted?" she asked. Noah's eyebrows lifted slightly at the wording. "He acts afraid to be alone with me," Chloe continued. Like he's always waiting for me to leave or turn against him. I don't understand it. With everyone else he acts so confident, so untouchable. Noah stared at her for a moment. Then he let out a quiet breath. I didn't make him that way. Chloe watched him carefully. Tate wasn't devoted because I controlled him, Noah said. He was devoted because for a long time I was the one person who saw him when he wasn't pretending. Chloe stayed quiet. No matter how much power he had, how much money he had, or how many people admired him, he always wanted someone to choose him, someone who knew the worst parts of him and stayed anyway. Noah looked down. But that doesn't mean I had power over him, it just means he cared what I thought. Chloe frowned slightly. So why does he seem afraid of me? Noah hesitated. Because you're the person who can hurt him the most. Chloe looked surprised. Noah. He's not afraid of you because you're weak, Noah explained. He's afraid because you're close enough to see him. Tate can handle people disliking him, he can handle people being intimidated by him. What he can't handle is someone he loves seeing who he really is. Chloe's expression softened. And you? Noah gave a small sad smile. I stopped being afraid of him a long time ago, that's probably what bothers him the most. Chloe looked at Noah for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, why did you sleep with Tate for 22 years? Noah didn't answer immediately. He understood what she was really asking, not about romance, not about attraction. She was asking why he had stayed in Tate's life for so long, why he had kept showing up for someone who had hurt him. Because he was my family in every way except blood, Noah said. Chloe watched him carefully. Tate and I grew up together, we knew each other before we understood ourselves. We were there for each other through things nobody else saw. He paused. For a long time I thought if I stayed loyal, if I reminded him that someone believed in him, maybe he would stop fighting everyone around him. Chloe's expression softened. But after everything he did. Noah looked down. That's the complicated part, caring about someone doesn't mean you excuse what they do. He folded his hands together. Tate had good moments. He could be funny, protective, and generous. He could make you feel like you were the only person in the room who mattered, but he also had a side of him that hurt people, and I spent years hoping he would finally face that. So you stayed because you cared about him? Noah nodded. Yes, but not because I thought I could fix him. He looked back at Chloe. I stayed because for 22 years Tate was someone I considered my closest buddy. I didn't want to abandon him. I just didn't realize that sometimes staying loyal to someone can mean losing pieces of yourself. Chloe sat quietly, realizing Noah wasn't describing a love story. He was describing a lifetime of companionship, loyalty, and disappointment between two boys who platonically loved each other until Tate got married. Chloe hesitated before asking her next question. Terrence told me something. Noah looked up. He said you know Tate better than anyone, why did he choose you? Noah was quiet for several seconds. I don't know if he chose me, he said at last. I think life just kept putting us in each other's path. Chloe frowned slightly. There were plenty of people who liked him, plenty of people admired him, but we grew up together, we shared memories nobody else had, we understood each other without having to explain everything. He gave a small shrug. Over time I became the person he trusted with parts of himself he didn't show other people. And you never understood why. No, Noah admitted, I think everyone wants there to be one simple answer, but there isn't one. He looked toward the window. Maybe I listened when other people didn't, maybe I challenged him when everyone else told him what he wanted to hear, maybe I stayed around longer than I should have. Chloe was thoughtful. So it wasn't because you were special. Noah smiled faintly. I wasn't special, I was just familiar. He met Chloe's eyes. When you've known someone for most of your life, they become part of your history. You remember who they were before the world changed them. Sometimes that history creates a bond that's hard to explain. Chloe nodded slowly. That makes more sense than anything anyone has told me. Noah's smile was bittersweet. It doesn't mean I understood every choice Tate made. It just means I saw more of his life than most people ever did. Chloe looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring absent-mindedly. I tried to physically touch Tate, she said quietly. At first he flinched every time. Noah remained silent listening. By the 4th week of our honeymoon he stopped flinching. She took a slow breath. But even now, he has to initiate everything. If I reach for his hand, hug him first, or put my arm around him, he tenses. If he does it first, he's completely fine. Noah thought for a moment before answering. That sounds less like he doesn't want you to touch him, he said gently, and more like he needs to feel in control of when it happens. Chloe frowned. Why? I can't say for certain, Noah replied. Only Tate knows what's going through his mind, but some people become uncomfortable with unexpected affection because they're always anticipating something they can't predict. When they're the one who initiates it, they know what's coming. Chloe nodded slowly, considering his words. So it's not necessarily about me. No, Noah said honestly. It could be, or it could have nothing to do with you. It could be a habit, anxiety, or something else entirely. The important thing is not to assume you know the reason without asking him. Chloe sighed. I've never asked him, I was afraid of the answer. Noah offered a sympathetic smile. Then maybe that's where you start. Not with assumptions, just with a simple question. You might learn something neither of us could guess. Chloe looked thoughtfully at Noah. Joey mentioned Tate was touch avoidant as a kid. Noah's eyes drifted away as the memory came back. He remembered the day Joey announced he had cancer at the Rambler. Before Tate had returned to the house, Joey had told Noah about Tate's traits. You know, Joey had said, Tate hated touch when he was little. Noah had looked at him in surprise. Hated it, Joey repeated. If someone hugged him without warning or tried to pick him up, he'd stiffen or pull away. People thought he'd grow out of it, but he never really did. Joey smiled sadly. The only time he wanted physical affection was when he decided it. If Tate reached for you first, that was different, but if someone reached for him unexpectedly, he couldn't stand it. Noah had nodded, filing the information away without thinking much of it at the time. Now sitting across from Chloe, the memory suddenly made sense. I remember Joey telling me that, Noah said quietly. It was the day he announced he had cancer before Tate came back to the Rambler. Chloe lowered her gaze. So he's always been that way. Noah nodded. It sounds like it. Joey made it seem like this wasn't a phase or something that developed later. He said Tate had been that way since he was a little boy. Chloe let out a slow breath. That explains why he still has to be the one to initiate physical affection. It might, Noah replied. At the very least, it means what you're seeing now isn't entirely new. Joey believed it had been part of Tate for as long as he'd known him. Chloe looked at Noah thoughtfully. Talia admitted something to me the day before the wedding. Noah waited. She said Tate was always on you or draped around your body. She described him as clingy and needy whenever you were together. Noah was quiet for a moment before a faint, bitter smile crossed his face. She wasn't wrong. Chloe looked surprised. He was different with me than he was with most people, Noah said. If we were watching a movie, he'd lean against my shoulder. If we were sitting on a couch, he'd stretch out until part of him was touching me. Sometimes he'd rest his head against my arm without even thinking about it. Chloe frowned. But Joey said he hated being touched. He did, Noah replied, by most people. Chloe blinked. Tate liked physical closeness on his own terms. He usually had to be the one to start it. Once he trusted someone completely, he could become surprisingly clingy. Noah looked down. It wasn't something he advertised. Most people probably never saw that side of him. So my mother-in-law wasn't exaggerating, Chloe said softly. No, Noah answered. If Tate felt safe with someone, he could be incredibly affectionate, but it had to be his decision. If someone else reached for him first, especially unexpectedly, he'd often tense up or pull away. Chloe sat back, trying to reconcile the confident, guarded man she had married with the person Noah was describing. It sounds like there were two different Tates. Noah shook his head gently. No, just one. Most people only ever got to know one side of him. Chloe lowered her eyes. I feel like I'm failing as a wife, she admitted quietly. He spends so much time drinking and surrounding himself with strangers. Sometimes I wonder, am I boring or is Tate just not attracted to me? Noah was silent for a moment before answering. I don't think either of those conclusions is fair. Chloe looked at him. I've known Tate for a long time, Noah continued. When something is bothering him, he doesn't always deal with it in healthy ways. Sometimes he buries himself in distractions. Sometimes he throws himself into work or social situations. From what you're describing, it sounds like he's avoiding something, but I can't honestly tell you what. So you don't think it's me? Noah shook his head. I don't know what's going on in Tate's mind, so I can't tell you why he's making those choices, but I don't think it's reasonable to assume they're happening because you're boring. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. Then why does it feel like I'm losing him? Noah sighed softly. Because when someone you love becomes emotionally distant, it's easy to blame yourself, but distance doesn't automatically tell you why it's happening. He met her eyes. If you want the real answer, it has to come from Tate. Only he can tell you what he's feeling, what he's avoiding, or what he needs. Anything else would just be us guessing. Chloe nodded slowly. I guess I've been trying to answer questions only he can answer. I think so, Noah said gently. And until you hear it from him, don't decide that you're the problem just because you don't yet know the reason. Chloe stared at the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Tate received the call about Tim's death during our honeymoon, we were happy. Noah listened without interrupting. We were spending time together in public and in private. We were laughing, talking, exploring new places. We genuinely enjoyed being together. She hesitated. The only strange thing was, Tate seemed like somebody else. Noah tilted his head slightly. His personality was different, Chloe explained. Even his vocabulary, he spoke differently, he smiled more, he seemed lighter. I remember thinking maybe this is the real Tate. She swallowed hard. Then the phone rang. Her expression crumpled. They told him about Tim and about the funeral. The memory washed over her. He didn't cry, he didn't yell. She shook her head. He just stood up from the cafe table. Her voice cracked. He didn't explain, he didn't ask me to come with him. A tear rolled down her cheek. He just ditched me. Silence filled the room. And afterward, Chloe whispered, he disappeared. She took a shaky breath. Later, I found out he'd gone off and slept with strangers. Noah lowered his eyes. I don't know what happened inside Tate after that phone call, he said quietly. Losing someone he loved could have changed everything for him in that moment, but I can't tell you why he made the choices he did afterward. Chloe nodded slowly, tears continuing to fall. It felt like I lost my husband in the space of one phone call. Noah's voice was gentle. I'm so sorry, Chloe. She wiped her eyes. I've spent every day since then wondering whether the man I met before that phone call was real, or whether I only imagined him. Chloe wiped her eyes. I found him 6 hours later, she said quietly. He was lying unconscious in the middle of the resort lawn. Noah's expression tightened. I thought he'd drunk himself into oblivion, Chloe continued, but he hadn't had any alcohol, he wasn't high either, he had just collapsed. She shook her head at the memory. When I reached him, his skin was cold and clammy, he wouldn't wake up. Noah frowned. Talia thinks he may have had a seizure, Chloe said. I don't know if she's right, but something happened to him. She drew a slow, unsteady breath. It all started with that phone call. One minute we were sitting together at the cafe, talking and enjoying ourselves. Then he got the call about Tim. Her voice became distant as she relived the moment. He stood up so suddenly he almost knocked the table over. He didn't look at me, he didn't say goodbye, he looked empty. She swallowed. Like a zombie. He just stumbled away into the resort. Silence settled between them. Later, Chloe said, her voice breaking, I learned that after he left, he sought out a group of strangers for a sexual encounter. She lowered her head. By the time I found him unconscious on the lawn, I didn't recognize the man I'd been having lunch with only a few hours earlier. Noah remained silent, letting her finish. It was like the phone call erased him, Chloe whispered. The Tate I had been with disappeared in an instant. Chloe looked down at the floor, her voice barely audible. When I found him on the lawn, the sprinklers were turning on every 15 minutes. Noah listened in silence. He was lying face down, completely unconscious. If I hadn't found him, her voice faltered, he could have drowned. She closed her eyes, remembering the panic. I rolled him onto his side and kept calling his name. A tear slipped down her cheek. For a long time he didn't respond. She swallowed. Then he finally whispered one word. Noah looked at her. What was it? Chloe's eyes remained fixed on the floor. Hazing. The room fell silent. He just said hazing. Noah repeated the word under his breath. Hazing. Chloe nodded. That was it, no explanation, no other words, just hazing. Noah frowned, trying to make sense of it. He never told you what he meant. Chloe slowly shook her head. Never. The silence between them grew heavy. For days that single word had haunted Chloe. She had never known whether Tate had been remembering something, dreaming, or reliving a moment from his past. All she knew was that, in the only moment he spoke before losing consciousness again, one word escaped his lips. Hazing. Chloe slowly shook her head. Was Tate in a fraternity when he was at Brown University? Noah thought for a moment before answering. No. He leaned back in his chair. As far as I know, Tate hated fraternities. Chloe looked surprised. He used to call them rape houses, Noah said quietly. Or something along those lines. He thought they encouraged herd mentality, toxic masculinity, and people trying to prove how dominant they were. Noah shrugged. I never forgot how strongly he felt about it. He wouldn't let you go, Chloe asked. Noah nodded. He never wanted me anywhere near fraternity parties. If one of my friends mentioned going to one, Tate would tell me not to. And the girls? He didn't want my female friends going either, Noah replied. He thought those parties could become unsafe, especially if people were drinking heavily. Whether he was right or wrong about every fraternity, that's how he saw them. Chloe sat quietly. So he wasn't against them because he wasn't invited. No, Noah said. He opposed the whole culture, at least that's what he always told me. He wanted nothing to do with fraternity houses, and he certainly didn't want people he cared about attending their parties. Noah shook his head. Why do you ask? Chloe hesitated. Well, fraternities at universities have hazing rituals. Seniors sometimes haze new recruits. I wondered if maybe Tate had gone through something like that. Noah answered without hesitation. Definitely not. He let out a short breath. I remember fraternity recruiters coming to our dorm room one afternoon. Chloe waited. They knocked on the door and started trying to recruit us. A faint, humorless smile crossed Noah's face. Tate wasn't interested. He told them, get the fuck off our floor. What happened? They kept pushing, Noah said. Tate lost his temper and physically threw one of them back out into the hallway. Chloe blinked. So there was no chance. No chance, Noah interrupted. He never would have joined a fraternity, and he never would have willingly gone through a hazing ceremony. He looked down for a moment. He used to say he didn't need to prove his masculinity to anyone. Noah gave a small shrug. And he'd call anyone who thought they did a loser. Chloe sat silently, trying to reconcile that certainty with the single word Tate had whispered while unconscious. Hazing, she murmured. Noah slowly shook his head. I don't know why he said that, but I'm certain it wasn't because he had joined a fraternity or been hazed as a pledge. That just wasn't Tate. Noah suddenly let out a quiet laugh. Chloe looked at him, confused. What's so funny? He covered his mouth for a moment, still smiling. I'm sorry, he said. It's just hearing Tate say he didn't need to prove his masculinity because anyone who did was a loser. Chloe raised an eyebrow. Why is that funny? Noah chuckled again. Because if you'd met the version of Tate everyone saw in Lowe's Angels, you'd understand. He shook his head. He dressed the part, he carried himself like he owned every room he walked into. Everything about his image screamed confidence, dominance, and control. Noah smiled to himself. And before we graduated, he practically admitted to me that he was the picture of toxic masculinity. Chloe blinked. He said that. Not in those exact words, Noah replied, but he acknowledged that he'd built this larger-than-life image around himself. Noah laughed softly once more. So when I remember him saying anyone who needs to prove their masculinity is a loser, I can't help thinking, he grinned, he was accidentally insulting himself. Chloe couldn't help smiling. I never thought of it that way. Noah's smile gradually faded into something more thoughtful. The irony is there was truth in what he said. He folded his hands together. Healthy, secure men don't need to prove they're masculine. Their confidence comes from knowing who they are, not from convincing everyone else. Chloe listened quietly. When someone's secure, Noah continued, life isn't a performance. They don't have to dominate every room, intimidate people, or constantly prove they're tougher, richer, or more powerful. They don't need applause to feel like a man. He sighed. Tate understood that intellectually. And emotionally, Chloe asked. Noah looked down. I'm not sure he ever believed it about himself. The room fell silent. For the first time, Chloe wondered whether Tate's carefully crafted image had never been confidence at all. Maybe it had been armor. Tate was recruited, Noah said. Chloe looked surprised. For athletics. Noah nodded. In high school and again in college, coaches wanted him on different teams because he was naturally gifted. He was an amazing athlete. So why did he keep saying no? Noah thought for a moment. I think there were a few reasons. He leaned back in his chair. One of them was that he didn't like the locker room environment. He hated listening to guys dehumanize women, make homophobic jokes, or act like being a man meant putting other people down. Chloe listened intently. He used to roll his eyes at that stuff, Noah continued. He thought a lot of it was performative. And the other reason. Noah smiled faintly. He didn't want to leave me by myself. If Tate were at practice every afternoon, I'd be sitting alone on the bench or walking home by myself. He knew I'd probably get picked on. So he gave it up. He never said it that dramatically, Noah replied, but he chose not to commit to school athletics. Chloe was quiet. I do remember him running track in high school for a while, Noah added, but he once joked that he only joined because it got him out of working on the school newspaper. A small laugh escaped him. That sounded like Tate. His expression became thoughtful again. For all the confidence people thought he had, Tate really disliked rigid ideas about what men were supposed to be. He hated macho posturing and the idea that masculinity had to be loud, aggressive, or cruel. Chloe nodded slowly. So the image he projected wasn't necessarily how he saw the world. No, Noah said. There was often a difference between the role Tate played in public and the opinions he shared when it was just the two of us. Noah was quiet for a long moment. You know, he said, I think Tate was very aware of toxic masculinity. I don't think he stumbled into it by accident. I think he understood exactly what people expected to see. He folded his hands together. I think he leaned into that image because it distracted people. If everyone believed he was just the arrogant, hyper-masculine, untouchable guy, they stopped looking any deeper. Chloe listened carefully. It was almost like he wanted people to think they had him figured out, Noah continued. Once they decided who he was, they quit asking questions. People would see the expensive clothes, the confidence, the bravado, the attitude, and they'd tell themselves, I know exactly what kind of man this is. And they were wrong, Chloe asked. No, Noah replied thoughtfully, not completely. That side of him was real, but I don't think it was the whole picture. He looked down. I think Tate used people's preconceived ideas against them. If they were convinced they understood him, they stopped paying attention to the parts of himself he didn't want them to notice. The vulnerable parts, Chloe asked softly. Maybe, Noah said, or the frightened parts or the conflicted parts, I don't know. He sighed. But I do think there was an element of performance, not that everything about him was fake, far from it, just that he understood the image he projected and he knew people would often judge him by that image instead of looking beneath it. Chloe nodded slowly. So the persona became a shield. Noah gave a faint smile. That's how it always seemed to me. The louder the performance, the less anyone looked behind the curtain. Noah sat quietly, considering his words. Tate was smart, he said, very smart. Chloe looked at him expectantly. I think he understood how people stereotype each other. He knew they made snap judgments based on appearance, confidence, status, and the way someone carried themselves. Noah shrugged. I've wondered whether he used those biases against people. In what way? Chloe asked. If someone looked at Tate and thought, I know exactly who this guy is, Tate rarely corrected them. Sometimes it almost seemed like he encouraged it. Chloe frowned. So they'd stop looking deeper. Maybe, Noah said. If people believed they already had him figured out, they became predictable. They reacted to the image they had created in their own minds instead of paying attention to who Tate actually was. He paused. I don't know whether that was something that came naturally to him or whether he learned it by watching other people. Maybe he noticed that expectations could be manipulated. Maybe he saw someone else doing it and realized it was an effective way to stay in control of how others perceived him. Chloe nodded thoughtfully. So he let people believe what they wanted to believe. Sometimes, Noah replied. Whether that was a conscious strategy every time, I can't say, but he certainly understood that first impressions and stereotypes are powerful. He seemed comfortable letting people underestimate him in some ways and overestimate him in others. Noah looked out the window. The difficult part is that once someone accepts the stereotype, they often stop asking questions. They assume they know the whole person, and with Tate, I don't think anyone ever knew the whole person. Chloe nodded slowly, looking exhausted. I feel like Tate's a test, she admitted. I don't know the answers, I don't even know the questions. She let out a shaky laugh that quickly faded. I feel like I'm failing. There are so many different versions of Tate, Chloe continued. Every morning I wake up wondering which one I'm going to meet. I don't know my own husband anymore. She looked at Noah, her eyes pleading. What's wrong with him? Noah took a long breath before answering. I honestly don't know. He chose his words carefully. I know he's had seizures. Chloe nodded. Talia also mentioned that doctors had considered whether he might have borderline personality disorder. He paused. But I can't say whether that's accurate or whether it explains what you're seeing. That's something only qualified clinicians could determine. Chloe looked down. I've asked myself 100 times whether growing up rich somehow caused all of this. I don't think that's it. Tate's family loved him, he continued. They were kind to him. As far as I ever saw, he had a stable childhood and a stable home. That doesn't mean a person's life is free of struggles, but I don't think it's fair to blame his upbringing simply because he came from a wealthy family. Chloe listened quietly. What I do know, Noah said, is that being the CEO of a major company is an enormous responsibility. That kind of pressure can affect anyone. Whether it explains his behavior, I can't say. He folded his hands together. I just hope whatever is going on, he gets the help he needs if he needs it. And the company. Noah gave a small tired smile. As long as he's able to do his job and any personal struggles aren't affecting his ability to lead during important decisions like board or shareholder meetings, I'm hoping for a positive outcome. He looked at Chloe with compassion. But more than that, I hope he finds some peace. Whatever he's carrying, it's been with him for a long time. Chloe lowered her eyes. I feel closer to Tate when we're physically intimate, she admitted. Noah looked down at the floor. He didn't want to hear this. The thought of Tate being physically intimate with his wife made him deeply uncomfortable, and he kept his eyes fixed on the carpet, silently willing himself to listen without interrupting. Chloe noticed his discomfort but continued anyway. I don't mean just the physical closeness, she said quietly. I mean that's the only time I feel like he's truly near me. She sighed. But emotionally, I can't say the same thing happens. I've never been around a man like Tate, Chloe continued. He's emotionally avoidant, but it's more than that. It's almost like he doesn't even want to be emotional or vulnerable. Sometimes I wonder if he only has sex with people he doesn't care about because it's easier. Noah finally looked up. What do you mean? Chloe clasped her hands together. Our society often treats physical intimacy as if it's the same thing as emotional intimacy. She shook her head. But they're not the same. Her voice softened. I can share a bed with Tate and still feel lonely. I don't know whether he keeps people at a distance because he's afraid of being vulnerable or for some other reason, Chloe admitted. Only Tate could answer that. Noah nodded slowly. Physical closeness and emotional closeness aren't always the same thing, he said gently. Sometimes they're connected and sometimes they aren't. Chloe looked at him. I just wish I knew how to reach the part of him that never seems to let anyone in. How often does he have seizures? Noah asked. Chloe shrugged helplessly. I've only been his wife for 10 weeks, she said. From what I've seen, maybe once a week. That seems more frequent than I remember. Chloe looked at him. I don't remember them happening that often when we were younger, Noah said quietly, but ever since he reached his mid-20s they seem to have become more frequent. He sighed. I don't know why, it could be any number of things or none of the things I'm thinking of. I can't tell whether it's related to his seizures or something else entirely. Chloe nodded. He hates doctors. I know, Noah replied. He's always told me he's terrified of them. He met Chloe's eyes. But if he's really having seizures as often as once a week, he needs to be evaluated. You really think so? I do. He spoke gently but firmly. Frequent seizures deserve medical attention. Whatever the cause is, it's something that should be assessed by a doctor rather than guessed at. Chloe was silent. I don't know if he'll listen to me. Noah gave her a small encouraging smile. He might. He paused. If anyone has a chance of convincing him, it may be you. Tell him you're not asking because you want to control him but because you're worried. Chloe nodded slowly. I'll try. I hope he says yes, Noah said quietly, because he doesn't have to face that fear alone. Chloe let out a weary sigh. I've tried to be kind, I've tried to be patient. I don't argue with him or push him, I just want him to feel safe. Noah listened quietly. When we go to bed, I'll try to sleep next to him or reassure him that he doesn't have to be afraid. Her expression fell. But he pushes me away. She swallowed. A few times he's accidentally pushed me right off the bed. Noah's brow furrowed. And some nights, Chloe whispered, I wake up and he's gone. She paused. I'll find him sleeping underneath the bed frame. Noah looked at her in surprise. He wakes up confused, Chloe continued. Sometimes he doesn't even know where he is. The room was silent. Talia told me he's been afraid of the dark since he was little. Chloe nodded slowly. Maybe. She sighed. I don't know if it's fear of the dark anymore. She looked toward the window. I think his nervous system just goes into overdrive. It's like his body never fully believes it's safe enough to rest. Noah thought for a moment before answering. I don't know what's causing it, he said carefully. It could have many different explanations and I don't think either of us can know the reason just by observing it. He looked back at Chloe. But if he's waking up disoriented, sleeping in unusual places, pushing you away without realizing it, and having frequent seizures, those are things that deserve medical attention. Chloe nodded, tears forming again. I just wish I knew how to help him. The best thing you can do is keep encouraging him to see a doctor. You can give him patience and support, but he deserves an evaluation from someone who can figure out what's really happening. Chloe quietly wiped away a tear. I hope one day he'll let someone help him. Chloe sniffled, wiping at her eyes. Tate sleeps under the bed sometimes. She shook her head. He has terrible night terrors, and when he has seizures, her voice trembled, they're so violent the whole bed shakes. Noah remained silent, letting her continue. The day before he got the call about Tim, something happened at the hotel. She took a slow breath. Our next-door neighbors started having a terrible fight. The husband was screaming at his wife. Chloe stared into the distance, remembering. The second Tate heard that man yelling, his whole body froze. Noah frowned. He stopped breathing for a few seconds. He just stood there completely still, like he couldn't move. She swallowed. Then he suddenly got out of bed and ran out of the hotel room. Noah listened intently. I chased after him, he didn't say a word. She shook her head. He went 3 doors down to one of the unused bedrooms in our suite, climbed into the bed, pulled the blankets over his head and went to sleep. The room fell silent. I didn't know what to do, Chloe whispered. It was like the sound of a man screaming terrified him. Noah chose his response carefully. I don't know why Tate reacted that way, he said gently. There could be many possible explanations and I don't think either of us should assume the cause. Chloe nodded weakly. But taken together, the night terrors, the episodes where he wakes up confused, the seizures and moments like this, it sounds like he's dealing with something that's affecting him deeply. She looked down. I just wish he'd let someone help him. So do I, Noah replied quietly. Whatever is happening, he shouldn't have to carry it alone, and it's important that he's evaluated by medical professionals who can understand what's causing these episodes. Noah slowly stood up from the couch. When's he coming home? Chloe gave a helpless shrug. I don't know. She looked down at her phone. He sent me a text yesterday saying he wasn't coming home until he was good and ready. Her voice cracked. It sounded like a text from a 6-year-old, belligerent, immature. She shook her head. I don't know what to do anymore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chloe looked up. Could you send him a text? Noah looked at her. Ask him to come home. Chloe looked as though she was about to cry. The realization hurt more than she wanted to admit. Her own husband didn't seem to want to come home to her. Noah closed his eyes and let out a slow sigh. I don't want Tate doing anything he doesn't want to do, he said quietly. He opened his eyes. He's a grown man. His voice remained calm. When he left my house, he made it very clear that he didn't want me around. Noah shook his head. It wouldn't be my place to interfere, and I think it would be inappropriate for me to insert myself into your marriage. He met Chloe's eyes. If he comes home because I asked him to, that doesn't solve anything. The decision has to be his. Chloe stared back at him for a long moment. Then, with visible disappointment, she slowly nodded. I understand. Neither of them said another word. Noah was quiet for a moment before speaking. However, he said gently, don't take it personally that he doesn't want to come home. Chloe slowly looked up from where she had been staring at the carpet. I'm pretty sure it's not because he doesn't want to see you. She blinked. Tate isn't punishing you because you don't measure up. Noah shook his head. You do. If he didn't care about you, he wouldn't have married you. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. He's just going through a lot right now. When Tate and I were close, there were times when he'd disappear by himself. He'd sit out on the patio by the pool for hours just staring into the distance. He smiled faintly at the memory. It didn't mean he cared about me any less during those moments. He looked back at Chloe. Sometimes he just needed to burn off steam, he needed space to think. Chloe listened quietly. I don't think he's trying to avoid his responsibilities forever, Noah continued. I think coping is hard for him. He sighed. Right now, he's carrying a lot. Tim's death, his responsibilities as CEO, his family, his marriage. Everyone probably expects him to have answers when he may not even understand what's happening inside his own head. He paused. That may simply be more than he can handle today. Chloe wiped away another tear. So you think he'll come home? I think when he's ready, he'll come home. Noah's voice was calm and reassuring. But don't spend a single moment convincing yourself he's staying away because you did something wrong. He looked directly into her eyes. If Tate ever fails to appreciate who you are or doesn't treat you the way you deserve, don't automatically conclude it's because there's something wrong with you. Chloe nodded through her tears. Noah gave her a small reassuring smile. I'm not officially a member of Tate's family, he said softly, but Talia has always treated me like one of her sons. He squeezed her shoulder gently. And because of that, I'm going to tell you the same thing I think she'd tell you. He smiled warmly. You don't have to earn your place in this family by being perfect. For the first time since the conversation began, Chloe's shoulders relaxed just a little. I'm sorry, Chloe said quietly, I hope you don't hate me. Noah looked at her, genuinely confused. Excuse me. Chloe let out a long, shaky breath. I never asked him to leave your house, I never asked him to cut you out of his life, I never told him to do any of that. Noah remained silent. I did ask him to move in with me a few weeks before, she admitted, but then we broke up. She gave a sad smile. Later, I decided I wanted to fight for the relationship. Noah tilted his head. You broke up. Chloe nodded. Yeah, I called him and we talked while we were sitting in his car before we had sex the first time in a remote location. She paused. Tate and I reconciled and we agreed to meet again at a restaurant a few days later. Her smile became bittersweet. I honestly thought he was going to break up with me for good. She laughed softly through her tears. What a surprise when he proposed instead. The room fell quiet. I never wanted to drive a wedge between the two of you, Chloe continued. Honestly, I thought he would choose you over me. Noah's eyebrows rose. And if he had, Chloe shrugged, I would have accepted it. She looked down at her hands. As long as he was happy. Noah watched her carefully. I wanted him to have the life that made him happiest. If having your friendship, your brotherhood, was what he truly needed more than a marriage, I would have let him go and eventually moved on with my own life. A tear rolled down her cheek. But for some reason, she looked back at Noah. He chose me. Noah was quiet for a long time. Finally he spoke. I don't hate you, Chloe. She looked up. I never did. His voice was calm and sincere. The choices Tate made were his own, they're not yours to carry. Chloe's eyes filled with tears again. If he chose to propose to you, that was his decision. If he chose to change his relationships, that was his decision too. Noah offered her a gentle smile. So don't blame yourself for choices that belong to him. Chloe nodded, a little of the guilt lifting from her shoulders for the first time in a long while. When I found out, Chloe began quietly, how he left you and abandoned. She stopped herself, not wanting to make Noah relive the pain. She took a slow breath. I was shocked. Noah remained silent. It wasn't right. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry if I was involved in any way, or if you ever felt like he had to leave you in order to marry me and start over. She shook her head. I never meant to hurt you and I never wanted him to hurt you. I never asked him to cut you out of his life. Noah listened patiently. There's no reason he can't have a close male friend or whatever you two were to each other. She gave a small shrug. Tate needs friends, he's so isolated. Noah nodded slowly. I think he does. Chloe hesitated. If you want, I could tell him you miss him. She offered a faint, hopeful smile. Maybe he'd reach out and rekindle whatever friendship you had. Noah smiled warmly, grateful for the kindness behind the offer. Thanks, Chloe. He paused before continuing. But honestly, I've moved on. Chloe looked at him. I've realized I deserve relationships where I don't have to question whether I matter. His voice remained gentle without bitterness. But I've also learned that it's okay to let go of relationships that leave me feeling hurt, unwanted, or like I have to earn my place. Chloe lowered her eyes. I'd rather surround myself with people who make me feel valued and respected. He gave her a reassuring smile. Chloe nodded slowly. I understand. And I truly hope, Noah said, that the two of you find a way to work through what's happening. He stood, offering her one last kind smile. But that's a journey the two of you have to take together. Just so you know, Chloe said with a small smile, I gave Tate a very firm talking to when I found out what he'd done. Noah looked at her. Leaving in the middle of the night without even leaving you, a note was terrible. She shook her head. If someone had done that to me, I would have left the relationship. I'd rather be single with good friends than stay with someone who treated me that disrespectfully. I didn't find out until the wedding reception how my husband had treated you. Susie did the honors. Yelled at Tate and told him he was a bastard. I figured out what had happened and well, unfortunately I didn't know before I married him. Noah listened quietly. I asked him to reach out to you, Chloe continued. I told him he should apologize even if he never wanted to see you again. She sighed. He refused. What did he say? Noah asked. He told me it wasn't my place to interfere. Noah gave a faint, understanding smile. I hope you find people who treat you the way you deserve, Chloe said warmly, and I'm sure you have enough friends that losing him hasn't left you completely alone. Noah smiled. I do. Chloe hesitated before adding, if you'd ever like to be friends, I wouldn't mind. Noah reached over and gently took her hand for a moment. That's very kind of you, Chloe. He smiled appreciatively before letting go. But I don't think that's the right decision. She looked at him with quiet understanding. I don't want Tate back in my life, Noah said honestly, and I think it would put you in an awkward position if we became friends. He slipped on his coat. I don't want you feeling like you're caught between the two of us or having to mediate anything. Chloe slowly nodded. I understand.